distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the South African government, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this virtual event, and I acknowledge this excellent initiative that brings together so many great minds as we seek to advance a better world post-COVID-19. This pandemic has severely tested many developing countries' social, economic, and political resilience. The threat to lives, livelihoods, and social stability posed by the COVID-19 pandemic has significant consequences for global peace and security, as well as multilateralism. Situations of instability and conflict have the potential to worsen, and there is a possibility of new forms of social unrest emerging, given the effects that the actions we had to take have had on our societies. While it is still unclear what the ultimate effect of the coronavirus will be, the current assessments are indeed sobering. Fighting this global pandemic requires the world to work far more closely together in collaboration with our premier multilateral institution, the United Nations, to use this institution as a unifying force to fight this war against the unknown and to improve the health of millions of people globally. I might add, to improve their well-being. While under lockdown, the social and economic implications of the pandemic and efforts to contain it became increasingly clear. Evidence in our own country of growing levels of hunger and income insecurity raised concerns about spiraling poverty, social unrest, and economic collapse as a result of long-term shutdowns that our government had no choice but to implement. The pandemic has set back the implementation of our agenda of development and cooperation. However, it has also provided us with the opportunity, as we discussed today, to reset the global agenda and intensify efforts at pursuing equality, non-racialism, non-sexism, and a world in which all enjoy justice and human dignity. The social and economic effects of COVID-19 have been particularly pronounced in countries that have weak public health systems, higher levels of debt, weak productive capacity, and associated low income levels. So a strong commitment is needed to assist the most vulnerable to meet the Sustainable Development Goals and our World's Agenda 2030. Much of our attention has focused immediately on responding to the virus. We now need to focus on opening trade and reviving economic activity while observing due care in curbing infections. Resetting our approaches means an open exploration of how productive capacities and manufacturing opportunities can be broadened to countries from which we generally extract commodities. They need the development of new economic sectors and support to develop these. We must do all that we can to support the poorest countries, particularly the least developed countries, to weather the economic shock they are certainly facing. The COVID-19 crisis strengthens the call for a new multilateralism in which global rules are calibrated toward the overarching goals of social and economic stability, shared prosperity, and environmental sustainability. We must confront all of these decisively and do so together. We can develop strategic priorities which can help build structural resilience and capacity in manufacturing food, in improving health services, in greater access to energy, and effective and efficient financial services. The more than 400 national, regional, and multilateral development banks around the world have to be persuaded that they can play a vital role, not only in minimizing economic decline and supporting recovery, but also in financing structural transformation, helping to lay the foundations for a financial model that is conducive to a more equitable and greener economy. Nationally and globally, action to address both the COVID-19 health crisis and its social and economic implications must be guided by the principles of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And we must respect the pledge as we reset to leave no one behind and safeguard justice and the human rights of all. Approaches that establish economic recovery and the protection of health, which are in opposition to each other and which do not equitably provide a solution, will merely create additional challenges to formulating effective responses and will distort necessary policy discussions. We must avoid the temptation to be domestic in our perspective and have a far greater global outlook as we implement new approaches. Our response as the global community must include special measures to address the particularly high burden of the crisis on women and girls. Women are subject and have been subject to domestic violence that has been reported to have increased during the periods of lockdown. And women remain overrepresented in informal, very vulnerable, and low-paying economic activity. The crisis has risked halting and even reversing progress on gender equality. Resetting our approaches requires a response that includes women, that ensures women are part of decision making, that ensures they're part of the new plans we develop, that ensures that they are beneficiaries. Social protection assistance has been the most widely used tool to assist the vulnerable in this period. As adapted, social protection and jobs programs were implemented in response to the pandemic. It is vital, post-COVID-19, that we ensure that our gender-responsive agenda actually does support women and girls. We believe that young people can play a key role in shaping national and international landscapes in the response to COVID-19. Harnessing the demographic dividend is imperative in this resetting period, particularly as we allocate resources toward new programs. we in South Africa have decided to craft a youth-focused agenda as part of our national response. We must also ensure, as I have said, that we invest in girls. This will require strong financial and social commitments from all of us. We know that as societies pause, as crisis hits, it is young women who will be removed from school. It is young women who will be the first to be placed in low-paying jobs. We must ensure this does not happen. Whilst we talk of young people, let us not forget the role of our senior citizens in our population. The contribution of older persons, particularly in my country, South Africa, and many African countries, has been one that focuses on development, especially an important role that they play in nation building, in promoting social cohesion, in strengthening our families, and in providing care for orphans and for vulnerable children. We thus cannot overstate nor neglect our senior citizens, particularly as we begin this process of reconstruction of our societies. South Africa, as the current chair of the African Union, has had to play a strong role in supporting the African response to the pandemic. We have had to refocus our priorities toward addressing the immediate health emergency caused by the virus and to addressing the inadequacy of our public health systems in our country as well as on the continent. We had to work with the continent to devise ways to invest in key health initiatives and to invest in means of mitigating the economic and humanitarian crisis on the continent. One of the stark features of what we have learned is that on the continent we must do much more to invest in science, research, and innovation in order to be party to the development of effective diagnostics, treatments, and other responses to the virus and future pandemics. Like many other countries around the globe, after months of battling the COVID-19 pandemic, our country, South Africa, has now moved toward transitioning from relief to recovery. Of 8 months, and with the support of various social partners, government has implemented a comprehensive set of measures to limit the social and economic impact of the pandemic. During this period, our government significantly expanded social protection on somewhat of an unprecedented and unexpected scale. In addition to existing social grants to over 17 million of our poor citizens, government topped up the old age grant, the disability and child support grants. We also, given the limits on employment, had to implement a special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant, which has reached 6 million people thus far. I think it is vital to once again call on the international community to work in the spirit of human solidarity and cooperation with one another. Solutions to the pandemic have to be developed through collaboration and genuine global cooperation. In a more reformed economic system, global, regional, and bilateral trade and investment will have to allow for policies which will develop productive capacity and industries in a way that would enable our countries to move toward equitable and sustainable development, especially in our least developed and other developing countries. No longer should we be the target and focus of extractive economies solely. We need to be a part of value addition in order for our societies and our economies to thrive. Alongside these challenges of developing new vibrant economies, many developing countries are confronted by the increasingly acute effects of climate change and other global environmental crises. New, additional, and at-scale support is urgently required in the form of grants rather than the current trend of loans, which have conditions and co-financing requirements that many countries that are poor cannot meet. These approaches exclude the poorest countries from accessing support to address the effects of climate change. We believe that part of a new governance system should also include adequate representation of developing countries in international institutions. A strong commitment is needed to maintain open and free trade, to keep borders open with restrictions limited to clear health reasons. And we need as well policies that help the poorest, particularly, as I have insisted, the least developed countries. We must help countries to recover. We must support economic growth. The measures that we've seen underway already are most encouraging. These include the United Nations Health Response, led through the World Health Organization, the COVID-19 Global Humanitarian Response Plan, the United Nations Global Framework for the Immediate Socioeconomic Response to COVID-19, the most important G20 debt moratorium. We need to insist that the debt assistance programs actually are for a longer duration to allow countries the liquidity to invest in recovery and to then begin to repay their loans. As I conclude, let me emphasize that the road to defeating the effects of this virus is still long and will, I think, continue to be hard. As we look to the post-COVID-19 era reconstruction, we must continue working as a collective, guided by the World Health Organization, and we must work in solidarity to build a better future. As the President of South Africa, President Ramaphosa, has often repeated, as the international community, let us choose cooperation above unilateralism. Let us choose solidarity above isolation. Let us choose unity of purpose above narrow self-interest. Let us emerge from this great adversity strengthened and even more united. As we reset, we cannot put this better. Thank you very much.